The published author that almost got me to quit GMing entirely. Hi everyone, All Things D&D is back with another story. Inviting new people to join tabletop gaming can be great. Honestly, usually works out pretty well, and a new person falls in love with it. But sometimes, it doesn't. Tell us about the time you invited a person to your table and it went right, or wrong, after listening to this story. This story takes place over a couple of weeks to a month, and to be honest, the horrendousness of it almost made me afraid to GM for new people ever again. This is the cast. Me. I'm a fairly new GM. This would be my second long-form campaign. My boyfriend, let's call him John. He's been role-playing and GMing since the 90s. My best friend of about 8 years. Let's call her Lily. She's got a few years of experience as a player. A friend I'd known for a few years as well. Let's call him Roger. Roger's girlfriend. Let's call her Mary. It'll have a deeper meaning. You'll see. The newbie and young adult author. For starters, this horror story is centered around a Vampire the Masquerade 5ED campaign. We had recently finished another Vampire 5e campaign, which John had been GMing. He was missing being a player, which was why I decided to step up to the plate for our next adventure. I'd been reading the Chicago source book and became very inspired to cook something up with the new lore-based material. Lily and Roger decided to tag along for the ride as players. That was when Roger asked if he could invite his new girlfriend to be a part of it as well. Roger explained that she was a complete role-playing newbie who'd been following our stories from the sidelines when Roger had excitedly been sharing our war stories with her, and she was very excited to join in. He also spent a lot of time reassuring us that she would be a very good addition and easy enough to roll in, as she had a lot of experience with storytelling. She was in fact a published author, with a handful of books under her belt, so surely she'd be a natural talent and catch on right away. Oh, how wrong he was. A little while later, I don't remember the exact time in between events, bear with me here, we had a chat with Mary to figure out how much she knew of Vampire the Masquerade, and role-playing games in general. Turns out her knowledge was more or less non-existent. Fair enough, I thought to myself, we just give her a crash course, a few key links who could give her a general overview of the world, and links to the base source book. We worked out what we thought would be the most fun and least confusing way of easing her into the lore-heavy world of darkness. She would play an Anarch fledgling, the child of an Anarch baron who'd been recently assassinated. The Camarilla, world-spanning vampire organization, would show her mercy and take her in to get access to Anarch secrets, and she would be put into a coterie, a small exclusive group of people with the other players. They would act as her guides to vampiric society, both in the game and out of it. Everyone agreed to this arrangement, and we were very excited to get started. I told everyone to think about their concepts while I prepared my material. While I was still working out the framework of the story I wanted to tell, Mary kept in touch with me. This didn't bother me, as I was prepared to hold her hand and answer questions as needed. That was when the red flags first started to show. She told me she wanted to play a character with a sort of multiple personality disorder, and she wanted them to have no less than 10 distinct personalities, separate social ties and lives. She'd written notes to each one of them, which she eagerly sent to me. I didn't want to stamp out her idea entirely, but let her know that 10 personalities was a bit much, and that I didn't think that separate personalities with separate memories and preferences was a good idea. It ran the risk of creating too much tension within the coterie, as the other characters wouldn't know which personalities to trust, and making decisions that some personalities might disapprove of would just be a mess. She saw my point and decided to dial it back to 2 personalities, but they wouldn't be so much separate personalities as identities, with shared memories and preferences. Fair enough, I thought. That I could work with. She also wanted to write a short backstory for and about her character. At this point, we'd settled on him being from the vampiric clan, the Ministry. Henceforth, her character will be known as Ministry. She sent the story to me, and it was a short story, all right, spanning many pages of writing diary entries. It was a little melodramatic, setting her character as the kidnapped victim of his sire's sadistic obsession and desire, ending with Ministry being turned into a vampire. As it was written from her character's point of view, the drama made sense. I thought it gave a very clear picture of her character's aloof, melodramatic, and eccentric nature. At this point, she'd settled on Ministry being a luxury escort and drag queen. He had his own private identity being a man, and then his drag escort identity who was a woman. I had a chat with her about being careful not to start world building, at least when it came to vampiric society. Mundane stuff she could make up as she pleased, but if she started making up her own lore, it'd be too difficult to fit into the framework of my very lore-heavy campaign. As the story didn't have a clear ending though, we decided to play it out as a small play-by-post roleplay between us. We decided on having the characters meet in the Baron's penthouse, and it would end up in an altercation and a mysterious explosion, which would send her character flying out of a window. As he was a vampire, he would of course survive the fall, and later get picked up by Roger's character. The play-by-post went fairly well, but I started to pick up on a mismatch between Mary's perspective and my own. Mary's post gave a clear impression between the lines that she saw her character as having a lot more power and influence than you'd expect a fledgling to have. Playing the Baron, I definitely expected the NPC to be in control and hold a certain dignity, even through the desire he might feel for Mary's character. As Mary didn't seem displeased with how the story was going, we finished it with no hiccups. It was not until after we finished the play-by-post she really let me know that she was sort of disappointed by it, as she had expected the Baron to be more of a sniveling lapdog who'd be following at Ministry's heels, begging for his affection. Literally what she said. We made a few retcons, as I tried to meet Mary somewhere in the middle, allowing the Baron some remnant of dignity, but also catering to Mary's view on Ministry's gifts of seduction. I mean, the Baron was supposed to die in the explosion anyway, so it wouldn't end up mattering much when the story got rolling. His death was the kickoff to the mystery that the PCs were going to be looking into in the first act of the campaign. As time was closing in for our official Session 0, I went through the folders on the Google Drive of all the characters, and that's when I found out that Mary had already filled out a full character sheet for her character, on her own. I asked her about it, and she said that Roger had given her a few pointers. The sheet was concerning, to say the least. Let's just say that she had multiple attributes maxed out, as well as multiple skills. There were no skills on her fledgling sheet that didn't have at least 1 or 2 dots. Josh and I called her up and had a talk with her, and though she seemed disappointed that her character would be nowhere near that powerful, and I quote, he should feel like a real main character. We let her know that she should wait until Session 0 rolled around, and then we'd help her fill it out properly, alongside everyone else. Before Session 0, Lily agreed to have a small play-by-post session with Mary as well, to establish a connection between their characters. I thought it was a fine idea, as it meant their characters would already know each other and we wouldn't have to spend too much time on introductions when the game got rolling. They already had the base concepts and backgrounds for their characters ready. The play-by-post session, though simple in theory, became a train wreck. Ministry spent most of the time simultaneously hitting on and insulting Lily's character, and when he became desperate because of her refusal to fawn over him, caused a scene by proposing to her in public. Lily asked John and I to read along, because she was so confused. Was she reading this wrong or misunderstanding something? We were as confused as she was. Mary tried to explain that Ministry's actions were a cry for help, that he was trying to get Lily's character back to his place, so he could tell her about the abuse he was experiencing at the hands of the Baron. Needless to say, Ministry did not succeed, and Lily's character started the game with a poor impression of Ministry. Session 0 was the first time we met Mary in person, and she seemed nice enough. I set about talking to everyone about what each of us wanted to get out of the campaign, and everyone helped each other flesh out their characters and fill out their sheets. For reference, John played a Lasombra, Lily played a Toreador, and Roger made a Malkavian. As we made good time, I decided that now would be as good a day as any to just start playing. We could still get a few good hours in after all. Each of the characters were introduced one by one, as they were called into Elysium from their havens with a handwritten letter from the Chicago Camarillas Seneschal. When Ministry got his introduction, I was immediately alarmed, but for some reason, I decided to give Mary the benefit of the doubt, as we could fix any misunderstandings later. Ministry was personally picked up by the Seneschal, as he had spent his last day sleep at the prince's domain, but Ministry was now embodying his female identity, and Mary played them explicitly as a separate personality. Ministry spoke of himself as another person, separate from his female self, even when the coterie met up with them, and all through meeting the vampiric prince of Chicago. Ministry broke decorum, talking over La Sombra, while he was asking the prince some questions about the coterie's quest, acting overly important, and telling the prince himself that he was wrong on several accounts. The rest of the session went okay, but John especially was on edge, having been talked over during that first half. After the session, Lily gave Roger and Mary a ride home. Lily later told me that during the car ride, Mary and Roger had been laughing and discussing how they could backstab the rest of the party and abandon the Camarilla entirely. An action that would totally derail the campaign. However, as it turns out, we would never get that far. We wouldn't even make it to the first official session. Before the next session, Roger and John decided to have some in-character conversation about what they each thought of the meeting with the prince and the Anarch addition to their coterie. Meanwhile, Lily and Mary had their own in-character conversation about Ministry's experiences under the thumb of the Baron. It very quickly became apparent that Roger's infatuation with his new girlfriend had worked its way into his character as well, as Malkavian was completely entranced by Ministry, thinking him right on all accounts, even in his dispute with the prince, and calling him someone obviously made for great destinies. Lasombra called him out on his bullcrap, and they quickly got into an in-character argument and a lot of out-of-game frustration. I decided to step in and had a chat with Roger, asking him why his character had that impression of Ministry, whom he had just met. I did tell him that it came off as a bit of a bias, but he got very defensive, accusing me of attacking him. Meanwhile, Lily sent me a message, asking me a question about some lore that Mary had apparently just made up, that there was apparently a lot of other Anarch fledglings out there that were oppressed and needed to be liberated. I once again came to Mary and asked her to be careful when it came to making up lore, as what she had said was definitely not part of the story I was telling. She exploded and went into a longer rant about how I was constantly berating her and on her case, and that she never felt like we were being very welcoming to her. That caught me completely off guard. After a bit of back and forth, where she both threw accusations at me and painted herself as a victim, I decided to clock out. I told her that I would get back to her, and I put the phone down to go and have a good cry and vent out my frustrations to Josh. I didn't check my phone again for the next 24 hours or so, having let the group know that Josh and I had a birthday to attend the next day. It was not until we got back that Lily let us know that in our absence, she had tried to pour some water on the fire. This had only agitated Mary further, as she was sure that we had sent Lily to fix things, which according to her was a dick move. She wouldn't believe Lily, and that it was all her idea to try some diplomacy. Turning on my phone, I found a slew of texts from Mary, in which she both scolded me and the group for our treatment of her, while simultaneously apologizing and making herself seem completely innocent, and in good faith. That was the last straw, and I immediately following this sent a group text, dismantling the campaign. I wanted nothing more to do with any of it, and promised myself a long break from GMing. Mary's response was of course that I was being completely unreasonable and unfair, while simultaneously apologizing for upsetting me. I haven't spoken to Roger or Mary since. Last thing I heard, Roger is starting a campaign of his own, with Mary as one of the players. Oh, are those poor souls in for a treat. Some of her behavior could of course be excused as her being a complete newbie, and maybe I could have handled some of it better, but by God did that experience leave me with some GM trauma. Fun bonus info, we sent Mary a link to Geek and Sundry's LA by Night, and her reaction was that she couldn't bear to watch it, as they were horribly bad amateurs, and she would know, because she knew that good amateur actors looked like. As she had hired some to film a trailer for one of her books. We all dropped our jaws at this response. Also, for anyone curious, her books are cringy YA novels published by a minor business. You definitely haven't heard of them. Not everyone has the presence of mind to understand that tabletop gaming is a group activity. It always amazes me that these people don't have the self-awareness to understand that they're the problem. Please let us know what you think and comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, All Things D&D. Our videos are posted every Tuesday and Friday, so stay tuned for more amazing Dungeons & Dragons content.